Um, Again, before I start back into things, can I get a few hands up just to confirm that people can hear me all right? Great, thank you very much. Okay, so I left you before the break with this challenge of looking at quarter two, which was exercise 3.3. And two things here. One is just simply to illustrate the method again. But the second point here, and I think the more important one, is really to consider the implications of a business such as Acme Drones, which is growing in volume as time goes on. So, quarter two, year one. The requirement is for 64,000 units, so we now need to, in the 25,200 minutes, we need to make 64,000 units. So we're going to have a cycle time of 0.3938. So cycle time has gone down from 0.45 to 0.3938. Cycle time has gone down, which means capacity has gone up, which makes sense because we need more capacity in order to produce more drones. How many stages do we need? Well, again, we divide the 1.6 by 0.3938. We divide the work contact by the cycle time, and we get the number of people, 4.06. So we nearly could have done it with 4 people, but we can't quite do it. We can't quite reach the 64,000. So we need to hire a 5th person. Okay, we just barely pushed over the limit. And this is something to think about, that you don't want to be careful if you're rounding the cycle time and the number of people, because the logic is that you round the cycle time down so that you err on the side of having extra people rather than falling short. So just to be aware of that real world implications of not using the decimal places. So 4.06 people, so we're going to have 5 people, and we're going to have a target of 0.3938. So again, here's the logic of it. So very quickly, can we get some suggestions from those of you who had a chance to look at this over the break? Can you recommend a number of tasks for the first person to do? And we'll draw them in and see how it looks. Again, I'd encourage as many different voices on the messaging, so just let's see the impact of that. A to D, A to C. Just looking at those chats actually, so Lou had a comment there during the break about 0.393755. Yeah, you can go to obviously a load of different places. So 39375 is even slightly more decimal places, but yeah, the answer is 5 people. So let's look at A, B, C, D or A, B, C. So which can we fit in? So A is 0.12 plus B 0.1, that's 0.22 plus 0.1 is 0.32. So 0.32, we're okay, we're under the limit. If we add in D, we're going to go over the limit there. So we can no longer get the first person to do job D. Okay. Shorter cycle time target means everyone has to do slightly less work in order to hit the cycle time target. More people, less work. So it's going to have to be ABC. Okay, next person. Suggestions? No, 0.32 minutes, by the way, is the cycle time for that one. So DEF, D to F. Okay, Niamh, thank you. 0.13 plus 0.15 gives me 0.28. 0.28 plus 0.05 gives me 0.33. So yeah, I'll go with that. 0.33 is inside the limit, so that's job 2. And the cycle time for job 2 overall is going to be 0.33. Next. Third person. G to H. Okay, Core, thank you. So G to H, 0.15 plus 0.17 is 0.32. 0.32 is inside the limit. So we will take that. And that gives us person number 3. It's getting tricky now. Person 4. What we can say is that we can't put K and L together because that'll add up to 0.4, which is too much, slightly over the target. So we can't put K and L together. So is that JK and IL? Oh, I think it looks like IK. So let's take JK and IL. So JK is 0.8 and 0.2, which is inside the limit. So I'm drawing a line like that. And I'm putting in 0.8 there. And that leaves me with 0.35. The other one. And that will be number 4 and number 5. Okay, so that works. And again, remember, mathematically we have it sorted. Nobody is doing more than 0.3938 minutes, so we will produce the right number of drones. What do we see? Well, we see the imbalance. You can see that the cycle time for each person is different. We have a very busy person in number 5 being 0.35. We have a relatively easygoing person in number 4 with 0.28. And job 1 is nice and straightforward. Job 2 is nice and straightforward. Job 3 is nice and straightforward. Job 4 is nice and straightforward. In every case, we're pretty much doing easy jobs. Job 5. So job 5, I have to take a component from person 2. I have to take a component from person 3. I have to combine them together. I have to give them to person 4. I have to wait while person 4 does something, and then I have to take the component back from person 4 and I have to do something else with it. So that's a messy job. So number 5 really has a messy job which can't even be done continuously. You have to do a few jobs, then stop and wait, and then do another job. So mathematically it works. Real world, person 5 is not going to have a nice job. They don't have a lot of work, or they have most work to do, actually, 0.35, and they have the most complex job. So you can see that as we continue on, it's just getting worse. The more we have to divide up the tasks, the more complex the flow gets. So there's a continuing issue, and it by and large what we tend to see is that the more we subdivide the work, the harder it gets to make it smooth and easy for people to do. Mathematically it will work, but in real world layout it's going to get difficult. Okay, I've photographed that again, so I'll issue these screenshots later so that you can go back and see what we've discussed in the live session. But let me just move on to my own kind of rough drawing of what I have suggested here. And you can see it's pretty much similar. Stage 1, 2, 3, exactly the same. It's all the same, isn't it? Yeah. So I and it's slightly different. I and K together, and then J and L. But again, we have a situation where there's complexity and there's people doing slightly different work. Okay. So the one last thing I want you to think about is the change from year 1 to year 2. So the next 2 slides, and I'm going to jump back and forth between them. Look at stage 1. Okay. In quarter 1, stage 1 was doing 4 jobs. In stage 2, they're only doing 3 jobs. If we think about person 2, in quarter 2, they have to do D, E, and F, but in quarter 1, they did E, F, I, and J. Person 3 did G and H in quarter 1, and they're still doing G and H in quarter 2. So some people are having to change, other people don't have to change. And that's what I mean when I asked you to compare the two. So this is really just a way of illustrating that. Stage 1 in the first quarter did A, B, C, D. Now they're doing A, B, and C. So you can imagine that for the first few days of quarter 2, the person 1 is accidentally going to do job D as well, because they're in the habit of doing it. They've been doing job D for the last 3 months, and it's going to take a while to get out of the practice of doing it. But if person 1 does job D in quarter 2, they mess up the system, because then the next person can only do E and F. So the second person has had to retrain from doing E, F, I, and J. You have to forget 2 jobs. Forget I, forget J, and only do E and F, but also learn how to do D. Person 3 doesn't change. Person 4 has to change from doing K and L to doing I and K. And person 5, I suppose, is straightforward, because when we hire somebody, we just train them to do those jobs. They don't have any previous knowledge to worry about. But you can see the complexity here. You can imagine how confusing it is for people when they make those changes from quarter 1 to quarter 2. There's going to be retraining. There's going to be a little bit of chaos. There's maybe a few mistakes made because people do the wrong job, and it messes up the whole flow. And that's really, I suppose, the key learning from going from quarter 1 to quarter 2. The process, the method is the same in order to work out the process layout, but you can see the real world implication of it now. So a few comments that I would just draw to finish up on this particular example. Learning curves. So people learn. People initially do things slowly, and then as they do them over and over again, they do it more quickly. Okay, I suspect when you first did that exercise of calculating the layout and allocating tasks to each person, you did it. It took a long time to do your first time. Second time around, you do it a bit quicker because you're learning the method. So this is exactly what happens in operations. People learn how to do things, and their cycle times reduce. Okay, so when production begins, operators will be inefficient. So the first few days of quarter 1, it wouldn't have been possible to produce drones in 0.45 minutes because everyone was learning the job. But they would have got up to speed, as we say, over the course of maybe a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks. The amount of time it takes to get up to speed depends on how complex the job is. When we got to the end of quarter 1 and went into quarter 2, we'd have to stop and reorganize. We'd have to retrain people. We'd have to move the benches around. We'd have to change the equipment so that people have the right pieces of equipment to do the work. Okay, so there'd be a kind of a ramp-up period at the end of the beginning of quarter 2, where we have to get back up to speed again. And the more tasks you have to learn, the more intensive the training and the slower the learning. So this is why we focus on only doing A, B, and C, because I can train you to do A, B, C in maybe a day, and then you're up to speed. But if you think about this short fat that I talked about earlier, to train somebody to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K is going to take a lot longer because they have to learn more tasks. So training somebody to do all of the tasks is going to take longer and be more complex. So that's another argument for having long thin, is you only have to train people to do a small amount of jobs. There's also the idea that if I focus on those small jobs, I'm going to get really good at doing A, B, and C. So I can become an expert in tasks A, B, and C. Whereas if I have to learn all the tasks, I haven't really the time to become experts in any of them. I'm more of a generalist, as we would say. So there's a lot of things happening there in terms of learning because of the fact that Acme Drones has to change its production levels because sales increased from one quarter to the next. Okay, so demand changes, and in businesses it happens all the time. It may be because it's a new product like the Acme Drones was and the market is growing over time, or it could be like we saw earlier that there's just simply a life cycle to products, and sometimes sales go up and sometimes sales go down. So you have to be adaptable to changing volumes, but production lines and balanced production lines are not that easy to change. So remember I said when I talked about mass production, I talked about the fact that a Toyota car factory can only make one type of Toyota car. The whole production line is designed just to produce a Toyota Camry, and they can't change and make a different product. Now we're finding that on top of that, not only can they not change to make a different product, they can't change the volume of the product they're making that easily. So you can start to see how locked in production lines are. They're very efficient and they're very cheap per unit if they're making the right product and they're making a fixed amount of that product. But as soon as you start to change the volume, it gets more complicated. So you've got this thing of changing the allocation, which is disruptive. In the longer term, the learning will improve, but it has to settle down. And then the other thing we noticed as we went along was that balancing losses typically increase. Now, I didn't calculate the balancing loss for Q2 year one, but if you do that, you'll see that it goes up to about 18.7%. So balancing losses have increased from 11% to 18%. Because of the fact that we're finding it more difficult to get exactly the right jobs to suit every single person. Okay, so that's Acme Drones, and hopefully that's starting to make sense in terms of the methodology. Now, there's obviously 8 more quarters in the case, or 8 quarters in the case in total. So I don't require everyone to do any more on this. I just want you to be familiar with what we've just done. But if you are really keen to do it, have a look at Q3 year one. Okay. Again, we have the same work content, we have the same time available, but the demand for work has gone up to 98,000 units. So say if you do want to try to attempt that, please do, and I'll happily discuss it with you if you email me the answer or post it on the discussion board, and we can have a discussion about that. But it's not compulsory. It's just for those who are happy with what we've done already and want to do a little bit more. The most important thing for the class generally is that you understand what we did in Q1 and Q2, and that you understand the implications of having to change from one to the other. Okay, so that's that. There was another set of notes which were called Lecture 3.5, People in Operations. Now, I didn't have a video of that at the time. I've just posted a video of that today, so you can look at that again. But you'll see that really that's just drawing on some of the things that we've started to learn from Weldon, or from Acme Drones there in the last bit of the course. So let me just kind of put up 1 or 2 of those particular items. So we have this idea of people in operation. And so having looked at layout and physical layout and line balancing, we start to realize that people are not machines. People are humans, and they need to be treated like humans, and you need to deal with the fact that humans have certain strengths and certain weaknesses. So we've looked at allocating the work times, and we've looked at designing individual jobs and how we kind of set out the work for them. You also need to appreciate the work environment. So you need to understand that the circumstances and the environment have to be right. I have to train the people in Acme Drones. I have to give them a proper bench and the right tools. I have to make it comfortable with good lighting and so on, in order to make it possible for them to do their work. It also starts to talk about organization. So do I have a team of 5 people who just work on Acme Drones, and do I have another team of people in a different department who are making a slightly different product? So the way that I lay out the work impacts the way that I actually set up the organization and the structure. And then human resource strategy. So what kind of people do I hire? How skilled do people need to be? Do we need to hire people who can make a whole drone from scratch? So maybe they need to be a trained electrician and a trained mechanic, or do I need to just hire people who are able to do 1 or 2 little tasks? So you can start to see how the whole thing starts to relate to human resource management and more complex issues. And I'm not going to go through this. You see this on the video, so I'm just going to pick up on a couple of these things. Yeah, flexible working. So we all want to have flexible working. We'd all like to have a kind of a bit of freedom to come and go as we please from work. But the thing is, with something like an Acme Drones production line, obviously everyone has to be there together. if I want to start making drones at 9 in the morning, everyone has to be there, or else I can't make any drones at all. So there are challenges with that, and difficulties in how we manage and organize people. Another point here was this thing of the ergonomics, as we call it. You have to make the work environment appropriate, because there's no way I'm going to be able to do all those tasks in 0.45 minutes unless you give me the right equipment, give me a comfortable seat and good lighting, nothing too noisy, and so on. And then the last point here was this idea of learning curves. So what we see with this learning curve idea is that initially things are very slow. It takes you a long time to do a task, and then as the more repetitive it is and the more often you do it, the more quickly that you can produce the product. And just to illustrate that, this is an example of an actual assembly of aircraft. So if you remember the aircraft assembly example that I showed you, this is an aircraft assembly task, which the first time that people did it as a team, it took, from the look of that, about 23,000 hours. So 23,000 man hours, maybe 1,000 people doing on average 23 hours work each in order to make this airplane from scratch. Okay, probably more than 1,000 people. Okay, and what happened is over time, the first one took 23,000 hours, the second one and the third one, and then the time started to fall. Okay, and it came down to about 20,000 hours. So by the time we were making the 10th or 11th plane, we had got it down to 20,000 hours. So think about that. That means that the cycle time has reduced, so our capacity to make planes is increasing as time goes on, with the same number of people doing the same tasks, but we're getting faster at doing the work. Okay, and the company knows this. So the company, you can see this dotted red line here. The company is actually planning on the basis that there will be a gradual improvement. And they reckon that the target is that eventually we should be able to make a plane in about 8,000 hours. So from 23,000 down to 8,000, that's almost 3 times as fast as the first plane. So we should be able to assemble planes in about 3,000 man hours. Sorry, 8,000 man hours, okay? And we see that gradual improvement happening. It jumps up and down a little bit from the green line, but yeah, we eventually were getting there. An interesting thing happened at this point. So CP401, in reality what happened was they found a problem with the plane. They found some fault with the assembly, because the first couple of planes had been sent out to the customers, and customers were saying there's some issue with some aspects of the plane. And they had to redesign small parts of the assembly. So we have a jump here from about 15,000 hours back up to about 18,000 hours, because we had to redesign the process and retrain a few people and change the way things were done. So there was a kind of a step backwards, and we had to jump up again. But what happened? Humans started to learn again. So again, the average time started to come down again. So the learning curve will be there all the time. The last one here, this diagram here, shows us that after about something like 56 planes, we didn't sell anymore. We made 56 planes, and then we didn't get any more customers. So airplanes are unusual, particularly these kind of smaller aircraft, because they don't sell an awful lot of them. So the truth is that the last plane we made took us about 12,000 hours to make. We never actually made a plane in 8,000 hours, because we never got enough learning done. We never made enough planes to get to that point. So it's a very particular issue in the airplane industry, that you do have learning and you do benefit as a result, but you don't necessarily get all the learning you could unless you design a very successful plane that a lot of people will buy. So the Boeing 737, which I think is now finally finished production, they've made thousands of those, and therefore they would have got all the learning done and they would have benefited from it. But remember, the first plane we made cost almost 3 times as much to assemble as the theoretical best. It certainly took twice as long to assemble as the last plane we made. And that's the truth of it, is that production varies greatly where there's a learning curve involved. So I think it's a very important thing to realize. So that's a couple of the items that we've learned here. As I say, those last number of slides I will post so that you will see the notes that we've added here. But people are not machines. People do learning. And there's many aspects to consider when you're designing the work. So you have to think about cycle time and balancing and hitting your target cycle time. But you also got to think about the ergonomics and the environment and the surroundings to make sure it's comfortable. And you've also got to think about the fairness and the motivation and the involvement of people. Okay, I think I said it with cells, that a cell operation, people are more engaged in working in a sports department because they're working with people who about something they care about. So in the same way with Acme drones, if I just do A, B, and C, I never actually get to see a completed drone. I just simply do a few tasks and then I move on and I do the same tasks again. Whereas if I make a complete drone, it's difficult because I have to learn a lot more tasks and it's harder to get that learning done. But the motivation is, at the end of the day, I made a drone and I can look at this finished product and say, look, that's what I did. I have some involvement, some interest in this because I've actually made a complete product. So again, motivation matters to people. So we can standardize work, and in the lecture I talk about these things, division of labor and work study, in order to be able to identify standard jobs and standard work. But there are advantages and disadvantages to it. So we've got to be very aware of that in a mass production environment, that it's not always the best way to do it. Okay, and obviously if output varies or if demand varies, then line balancing in mass production is very, very challenging. Okay, so that really is it, and I'm going to leave it there. So we have about 13 minutes left, so a bit of time if anyone wants to ask any questions, either about the earlier bit about layout and different layout types as we illustrated in Singapore Zoo, or any questions about the methodology for line balancing and how that's calculated, or indeed the more general issues about changing production and being flexible and treating people as people, not as machines. So I'll leave it there. Any questions? Anyone want to post any questions or ask a question, then please feel free for the next 12 minutes or so. Okay, can we update day 4 discussions so we can start working tonight? Well, the day 4, the slides and the material are all there, so I'll open up the discussion posts in the next half hour or so and do that, certainly, Matt, no problem. Okay, we seem to have this every day, so I'll stay on, and I'm noting if there are any questions, I'll answer them, but if there's nothing else that you want particularly, then you're free to go. But please, if there are any questions at all, please do ask, because I say I've no doubt that there are aspects of this that are not absolutely clear to you, and this is a chance to ask those questions. So I'd encourage you to use the time that we have together and do that. But if not, then I'll see you tomorrow at 4 p.m. Singapore time for day 4.